Welcome to the February 2025 edition of the Digital DJ Tips DJ School Inside Track podcast. This is where we look at 3 burning topics in the world of DJing this month in front of a live audience of our students. And we've got some good ones. So we're going to be talking about the real cost of digital DJing, of taking up this hobby. We're going to be looking at the difference between lossy and compressed audio. Sounds geeky, but nowadays you've got lots of choices, not least because some of the DJ streaming services are introducing lossless compressed files. What's it all about? We'll make it easy to understand and help you pick the best type of music to buy and play in your DJ sets as far as the technical side of it goes. And finally, users of Rekordbox, which is the software that powers the most popular DJ equipment in the world, have been unable to subscribe, cancel their subscriptions, upgrade or downgrade since the turn of the year, some users are telling us. This is something that seems to have no end. And it might raise an eyebrow or two among those of you that think the company that provides DJ gear to the best DJs in the world and has done for decades ought to maybe have their software ducks in a row a little bit better than they have. We'll talk about what the problem is, why it might have happened, and we'll expand it to talk about the general DJ software world and the problems it faces that are maybe a bit different to software created for other industries such as photography and video making and so on. So if you enjoy this, please do leave us a 5-star rating or review on your platform of choice. Let's get started. So we're going to start today by talking about the real price of digital DJing, learning to DJ, the real price of this hobby. Because unless you're a super casual DJ who just wants to mess around, maybe you've downloaded a phone app or you've just got a very cheap piece of kind of toy DJ gear. And to be honest, you're not interested in how it's done properly. You're not interested in professional results. You just want to have a little mess around. Maybe you bought some DJ gear for a young child or something, you know. So super casual DJs, we're not talking about when we talk about the real price of DJing here. But equally, we're not talking about the working DJs, because as soon as you're a working DJ, as soon as it becomes a significant part-time income or even a full-time income, then it's a different set of thoughts because it's an investment and the kind of gear you're buying is different as well. So what we're talking about here is the kind of gear you need to have a go at DJing seriously and start learning properly, which is different to the kind of gear that a working DJ would buy, because a working DJ would be buying lights and power equipment and transport equipment and all these kind of things that to learn how to DJ in your home and then to play out or to play a live stream or to play a party for your friends or to make a mixtape, the kind of gear you need for that is different. It's less, clearly it's less gear. And probably less professional. But that doesn't mean that you can't get serious DJ equipment. Indeed, we recommend that you should if you want to learn this hobby seriously. So we're talking about the DJs in the middle. We're talking about DJs who maybe want to learn the proper skills of this game, want to learn how it's done by the professionals, and want to prove that they know that by playing, I don't know, maybe a 90-minute or an hour or a 2-hour set at some point within the next few months or year at the latest, right? So that's the kind of DJ. If you want to do that, what's this hobby going to cost you? That's what we're going to talk about here. So we've done a lot of research on this, and indeed you can read it over on the digitaldjtips.com website, where I have broken down with my team various scenarios and given exact costings and given exact routes to go down and recommendations of equipment and different services that you might want to subscribe to and different items you might want to buy and so on. And we literally do it like a list, like a shopping list, and give you all the prices. Now, we're not a download store, we're not an affiliate store, we're not Amazon, we don't make any money from any of this stuff. We just do it to help our students as a DJ school, right? So you can see kind of unbiased, real numbers over there. What I want to talk about though here on the podcast is more the general cost of this, depending on which route you take. And this is important because right at the beginning of your DJ journey, you're going to find quite quickly there are 2 routes that you can take, and they will cost you differently. They will cost you differently up front, but then they'll cost you differently year after year. And it's important to know this before making your choice. So The two ways that most hobby DJs do this, the most popular way and the way with the lowest barriers to entry, which in cold hard terms means the way that's going to cost you less up front, is laptop DJing, where you buy a DJ controller, and these DJ controllers can be quite small or they can be quite big and expensive, but you buy a DJ controller which plugs into your laptop. And on your laptop, you run a piece of DJ software where the clever stuff happens. Now, this means that you could unplug that DJ controller and the laptop would still work. You could still DJ from that piece of software. The software is designed for you to perform from, and the thing you plug into it, the DJ controller, is just controlling that. Okay, so that's what laptop DJing is. And there's a crucial difference between that kind of DJing and the kind of DJing that professionals do in the clubs because they don't have a laptop with them, and that you can do at home nowadays as well with increasingly fantastic equipment, which we call standalone or all-in-one DJing. And that means everything you need is in one box or one set of boxes, but at home it's generally in one box because you have your decks and your mixer and it's all put together in something that's easy to pick up and put down and carry around and so on. So standalone or all-in-one DJing has all that clever stuff that you find in your laptop that your controller is just controlling when you do the laptop DJing route. It has all of that built into it. Now that's great because it's convenient and it's all there and it's one box. You plug it in once and then you start playing and all this good stuff. But of course, in order to have anything like the functionality you can get from a fantastic laptop plugged into a box, you're going to need the equivalent power inside that all-in-one standalone DJ unit, and that costs money. So when we're talking about the real price of digital DJing, we have to know which of these two routes is best for us. And there's a few nuances when you're deciding, so let's talk about a few of those. So the general rule is, if you're going down the standalone all-in-one DJ route where you don't need a laptop, it's going to cost you more. It's going to cost you very roughly 50 to 100% more up front, because you have to buy that piece of equipment that's got all that power built into it. As opposed to buying a DJ controller that can work with a laptop, assuming, and it's a big assume, that you already own a decent laptop, a modern laptop that's quite powerful. But assuming you do, buying the DJ controller is going to cost you 50 to 100% less than an equivalent standalone system. So we're talking for the very cheapest standalone systems, about $600 or $700, and they can go up to $3,000. And then when we look, or $3,500, then when we look at the laptop route, well, we're talking, you can start at about $300. And if you get to about $1,500 or $2,000, you're buying really, really good equipment there, right? So there's a big price difference up front. However, the thing with computers is they need software. And the DJ software companies don't want you to get that software for free when you buy the box. So they're increasingly coming up with ways of making you pay, even if you spend quite a lot on a DJ controller. Quite often the software in the box is cut down. It's a light version. It has features removed. And this is happening increasingly across the board. And quite often the companies won't let you buy it if you want to upgrade it and get a better version. You have to subscribe to it. So it's really important to know what that's going to cost you. And that's why the article's worth going and taking a look at if you're new to this and you want to make sure you've got your numbers right. Because if you have a subscription that has to be paid every month to keep the features that you want forevermore, then that has to be factored into the low price you paid for the unit in the first place. It's a little bit roughly like when you buy a cheap printer and the cartridges are very expensive. And so it is worth considering this when you are thinking about which of these routes might be better for you. It could be a false economy buying a DJ controller. And even the more expensive DJ controllers now sometimes don't have everything you need, and sometimes you're going to have to make a choice. Now, there are legitimate reasons why you might want to subscribe to things, and they are legitimate costs for a DJ hobby. So for instance, here at the Digital DJ Tips School, we always recommend that students subscribe to a music service, a music streaming service like Spotify is the big one, of course. Apple Music is the next biggest. Spotify doesn't actually work in any DJ software, which if you're only using it to discover new music, which you then go and buy, it's not the end of the world. But it is good to have one that does work in DJ software. So some software can use Apple Music, some software can use most software nowadays, and a lot of standalone units can use Tidal and specialized Beatport and BeatSource, the names of two specialized DJ services, Beatport and BeatSource, and SoundCloud, and there's others as well, right? So we recommend that you use one of these because as a DJ, you should hear more music than everyone else. And they're a great way of keeping music playing, right, all the time. So we're not saying that you shouldn't subscribe to stuff for this hobby, but just that you should be aware of stuff that you will have to subscribe to, whatever. Another good reason for considering a subscription is if you want to keep all your music in the cloud, which has got lots of benefits. Some of the software will let you edit your music and even buy music and add it to your collection on your phone when you're out and about. And then the next time you get back to your main music setup, everything's there, right? So there's reasons to do this, but you do need to consider it and you do need to add them onto the sticker price of the gear that you're buying. So when we're talking about the real price of DJing, another thing we hear a lot is people saying things like, I don't actually want to perform. Am I mad wanting to go and buy DJ gear? And this comes down to, I think, the hobby versus side hustle argument. So until, we're a DJ school, we've been teaching this since 2010. Until COVID happened, there was this feeling that if you weren't making money from what you were getting up to, you shouldn't be doing it, right? So everything is a side hustle. If you've got a job but you want to do something else like DJing, well, make it a side hustle, make money from it and so on. I think the COVID times changed that. Something flipped in people's minds. It suddenly became okay to have a hobby. And that's where we sit on this. It's okay to have a hobby. It's okay to spend money you don't expect to get back for your well-being, for your creativity, to do something you've always wanted to do. It's better to regret something you have done than something you haven't done, as they say. So we think as a school, clearly we're going to say this to people, you should be okay about having a hobby to do this. It's not wrong. But equally, it's not wrong to side hustle. Equally, if you do want to spend what you consider to be too much money on DJ gear, a lot of DJs get into this because they love the tech. They love the tech as much as they love the music. So if that's you and you do want to spend, obscene amounts of money on stuff, then it's okay to try and make some money on the side. It's okay to play a few gigs as well to try and make that money back. A lot of DJs start playing gigs, start going out there and getting paid for their DJing purely because they want to fund their gear habit. It used to be their music habit. Now it's their DJ gear habit because music is so much cheaper. That's how I got started. It's always trying to be more attractive to the opposite sex or trying to get cold money to spend on music and gear that gets people into this, in my possibly cynical, but certainly rooted in the real world experience. So look, don't think that it's wrong, but also at the same time, don't feel forced into trying to make money out of this. But do be aware, do have your eyes open as you go in, especially if you're looking at cheap DJ gear that, it feels like, well, that's the way to go for me because it's not going to cost me very much. It's always not quite as simple as that. As I say, there is a great article over on Digital DJ Tips called The True Price of DJing or The Real Price of DJ. Go take a look at that. Now we're going to move on and talk about something utterly technical now. Whenever these topics are suggested by our students, I always worry that they're just going to leave the non-technical people listening in. We have lots of listeners to this podcast and lots of viewers of this podcast who are just here because they're just interested in how DJs do it, right? And I always think these are going to alienate people, but I don't know. They don't seem to. People seem to enjoy them. So we're going to move on and talk about a completely technical topic, but hey, you might just learn something. You certainly use what we're talking about. You do, whether you're not a DJ at all. It doesn't matter whether you are or not a DJ. You do use these things. And these things we're talking about are music files. Music files, digital files, the things you will be buying every month when you're DJing as a hobby, and they'll be part of your expenditure. They are the digital files that you buy, download, keep on a hard drive and play in your DJ sets, in your DJ software. And what we're going to talk about is a question that does come up quite often, which is, What's the difference between lossy and compressed music files? People hear, don't play compressed music, or, oh no, that's a lossy format, you shouldn't use that, or, hey, you know, this is pristine, lossless, uncompressed audio, this is what you should be playing, and so on. And so I wanted to talk through this. Now, as ever, there is training for this in our courses, and there is an article on digital DJ tips. You can go to digitaldjtips.com, click in the search bar and type in music file formats, and you will see it. However, this is the question that we've been asked a few times this month, and you don't need to go there to get the value from what I'm about to share with you. The difference between lossy and compressed audio. Right, so let's start off by talking about lossless, uncompressed audio. This sounds like the best, doesn't it? It's lossless, nothing's been lost. It's uncompressed, it hasn't been squidged. And indeed, it is the best. So the classic file format for lossless or uncompressed audio is WAV or wave file format. So this is a large music file. It's going to take a lot of space on your hard drive. And the reason for that is there's a lot of information stored in it. It's lossless because it is true to the original music as it was recorded within the constraints of digital music, and we won't get technical about this, but it's a true representation. Nothing's been lost from the original recording. You're getting the original recording. It's uncompressed because no one has taken that lossless audio recording and done anything with it. No one's tried to make it smaller. No one's tried to make it fit, you know, more of them on a hard drive or whatever. It's just how it came out of the recording process. You've got a big, old, fantastic sounding, lossless, uncompressed audio file. And WAV or wave files are the classic version of this. They're beloved by people who produce music, for instance, who will get all their samples in wave files and outputting their music when they've produced a track to send it off to be mastered or to a studio or whatever. They are the currency of serious music people. So that's a lossless, uncompressed file. Let's now talk about the two variations of this you're likely to come across. The next variation of this, and easily the most popular music file format, I'm sure if I said to you, hey, name me a music file format, if you were still awake, you'd say, Phil, it's an MP3, and you would be bang on. An MP3 is the classic version of a lossy, compressed music file format. Other versions exist. For instance, iTunes or Apple Music uses a version called AAC, but it's the same thing, it's the same deal. So what's happened here is that along the line, people have said we want smaller music files. Back in the day, it was really important because, of course, hard disk space, the amount of room you had on your phone to carry your music around and so on was just far more limited, and because it was far more expensive. Now there's not quite as much push to have everything tiny. However, they are useful. They fire over the internet very quickly. They stream very quickly on websites and so on. You know, small music files are good. They have a lot of advantages. So along the line, someone said, let's make them smaller. And they came up with the MP3. It was a really clever idea because the idea was, let's look at the music file and let's take away all the stuff that's in there that you can't really hear. So we're talking, again, keeping it very, very simple. We're talking about all the stuff that's so low down that your ears can't hear it, or so high up your ears can't hear it. We'll just keep the bit that you can actually clearly hear. And there's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the basis of it. And so special algorithms were written that could do that, that could throw away data no one could hear and could squash it down and make it much, much smaller, much smaller. And if you uncompressed it, if you made it bigger again, you wouldn't get that back. You wouldn't get back the stuff that had been thrown away because it was thrown away for good. So that is a compressed format because it's smaller than the original file by quite a long way, but it's also permanently lost something. It's lossy. There is stuff missing. If you've ever taken a photo in a photo editing app on your computer and shrunk it down from the big photo that arrived out of your camera and made it really small to fit, I don't know, a web page or to email it to someone, and you've then made it bigger again, you'll see that the bigger version, even though it's the same size again, will look a lot worse. There's another example of what I'm talking about, right? So MP3s and AAC files are a lossy compressed format. Now, we're not talking about audio quality here, But if you were talking about audio quality, the debate would be, well, can you actually hear the difference? And some people say you can, some people say you can't. Certainly test that on a good pair of headphones if you want to find out what you think. There are websites that will let you do that. But anyway, you know, good quality MP3s are pretty good sounding, and they're a lot smaller. But that is an example of something where the original music has been compromised in order to give you that smaller file. But there's another kind of file. There's a file which combines the best of both worlds. And this is the lossless compressed file. This has been compressed and made smaller, but nothing's been lost. All the original data is there. What kind of voodoo is this? How can we manage this? Well, these files, and to give you some examples, the one that has got us talking about that on this podcast is called a FLAC file, F-L-A-C. And the reason is that a couple of the streaming services actually that I mentioned earlier that have been designed for DJs, Beatport and BeatSource, are now selling and also allowing DJs to stream into their DJ equipment FLAC files. Again, this is a good example. They're smaller, but they're really, really high quality. And so they're good for streaming services, right? So I mentioned it earlier. There's a real world example of that. So FLAC files are one example. There's another one, an Apple version called ALAC, A-L-A-C. There is another version called AIFF. They all do the same thing, right? They're all lossless. There's nothing been lost, but they've been squidged. So how do they do that? Again, I'm going to give you a non-technical example of how they do it. Because one, I'm not technical, and two, you don't really need to know. But what you might be thinking is, well, that's impossible. This is rubbish. It's actually not. Let me explain to you. Imagine a piece of music had one note that just carried on for a long time and nothing changed, right? Now, you might listen to that and say, that's just one note. And on a lossless uncompressed file, like a WAV, that might be recorded as, 20 bits of data. One note, 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 20 times, right? Whatever that number is, whatever that data is, it's just representing the fact that it goes on for a certain length of time and it doesn't stop. In a lossy file, they might just kind of like say, oh, just do it 5 times, that'll do. And you won't really hear the difference. It's made it smaller, but it's changed it. In a lossless file, really clever algorithms say, okay, let's encode this to make it smaller so that it can be made bigger again before someone listens to it. And so in that instance, this long line, this long note that's been represented by 20 little bits of data, it could be represented by 1 times 20. In other words, it shows you what it looks like and it says just do this 20 times, right? It's a little bit like when you're at the cashier at the supermarket and you're buying multiple items of the same thing. The cashiers who are just getting on with the job and not really thinking, will just scan every single one. But the cashiers who are trying to get their job done quicker will scan one and just type in the number that you're buying, right? So it's a clever way of doing the same thing, but you don't lose anything because when that gets to the equipment that's going to play it, when that lossless compressed file gets to the equipment that's going to play it, the equipment says, okay, this says do this one thing 20 times. Bang, it goes back to exactly how it was on the original music file. So it's a lot more complicated than that, of course. But the thing to understand is there are ways of looking at a piece of music or a piece of audio and encoding it without actually losing any of the intrinsic data. So it can be expanded again later, uncompressed again later, and it will be exactly the same as the original file would have been. So lossless compressed files do have downsides. So it used to be compatibility because they were not quite as compatible. And in order to run these algorithms, some equipment couldn't cope, which was the reason. However, nowadays they tend to be quite compatible in most DJ gear and so on. But you do need to check that everywhere you want to use the file is likely to work. If you're, for instance, subscribing to one of these services, I'm talking about Beatport or BeatSource, and then you need to just make sure that that's not going to trip you up. But the other downside is they're not as small as MP3s. They're, for the same piece of music, it's going to be bigger. It's going to be somewhere between the original big uncompressed lossless file and the MP3, right? So you're not going to get the best of every world in one of these. But they're worth knowing about. And like I say, they're now available in DJ platforms and on DJ streaming services as of kind of this week, if you're looking at the couple I've mentioned, and they weren't there before. So if you've ever wondered, now you know. So of course you're a technical bunch, and I'm looking forward to what you're saying, because this is, as ever, recorded in front of our live audience of students. So what are you saying? So Frank says, even though I only use 320 MP3s on my decks, I always download FLAC or WAV files and I convert them. So I keep the lossless file as a backup. Like, for instance, keeping all my CDs as a backup when I've digitized them. I absolutely love that, Frank. It's a really good thing to do. So thank you for sharing that. And Mark is saying Tidal uses FLAC now as well. Yeah, Tidal used to use a different system which kind of went out of business. I can't remember what it was called now, but they've switched to FLAC files. Yes, you're quite right. Someone else is saying it's a little bit like zip files on a computer. Thank you for that, Lou and Frank. Yes, it's exactly like zip files on a computer, because zip files are files which can be made back to their original files. Thank you to ATGR, aka Mixmaster G. You're quite right. AIFF files are equivalent to WAVs. They're not at all compressed. So thank you for pulling me up on that typo. The compressed lossless files are FLAC and ALAC. Thank you for that. I'm going to just pull in one comment on the previous topic, because I want to do that before we move on. This is from Mark, who says, I'm unashamedly a hobbyist. I'm playing for myself and for my family and my friends. It was not the startup cost that hit me. I already had a laptop and a music streaming service, and I figured that a small controller would not lose me money if I didn't take to DJing and I sold it on. The next step, and the thing that cost me, remember what we're talking about here is back to our first topic of the real price of starting DJing, was a small PA system, and then a new laptop, and then backup drives, and then a Mixcloud subscription, and then a second music subscription, and then even more vinyl and CD purchases. Mark, I know where you're coming from, my friend, but Mark ends off by saying, the enjoyment is priceless. I totally agree with you, Mark. I'm a runner. I run marathons in my spare time, and I read a funny meme the other day that said, you know, running is free. You just put your shoes on and get out there. And then it did exactly what you did there, Mark. It started listing the 4 types of trainers and the types of, wicking outfits you have to wear, and the visors and the gels. And any hobby in a capitalist world is going to cost you as much as you're prepared to spend on it. I totally get it. I'm with you there. So thank you for that. So we're going to move on to our third and final topic today, which is a topic that touches on a few of the things we've already touched on, actually, and other things that we've talked about quite a lot recently, and that are turning into one of our topics of 2025, which is the standard and the state of DJ software. So here's the story. On the 5th of February or thereabouts, users of one of the most popular pieces of DJ software called Rekordbox, which is the software you will use if you buy equipment from Pioneer DJ, right? They've actually changed their name to Alpha Theta, advisedly or not, recently. But you know, the gear that you see everywhere, the gear you see on TV when you see DJs playing, the gear you see in clubs when you see DJs playing, the name that you will recognize if you go to a DJ store and you want to buy some equipment, right? Pioneer DJ. Their software is called Rekordbox. You need this software for preparing your music to play on their systems, if you want to keep your music in the cloud to play on multiple systems that they've got, if you want to DJ with a DJ controller. It's the same piece of software that you perform on. It's their kind of big piece of software that does everything. It's called Rekordbox with a K. And on the 5th of February, Rekordbox had a problem. And the problem was this. Users who wanted to upgrade their software to do all the clever stuff that we were talking about a minute ago at the price of DJing. So they'd bought a cheap controller and they wanted to upgrade their software so they could record their DJ sets and edit them and do all the stuff that you can't do on the cheap version, on the free version. Found that they couldn't do it. They couldn't get that subscription. Even worse, people who were subscribed to it found they couldn't cancel their subscriptions. And people who were subscribed to it and were paying a subscription but wanted to change their level because they wanted to get the cloud as part of it, or they wanted to move up a level so they could use the lighting features that it controls. And any, you know, there's, as with all software, there's various tiers. They found they couldn't do it either. In other words, everyone was frozen where they were. And as you can probably imagine, this was causing and is still causing, and here's the story, a bit of a problem, because now on the 27th of February 2025, as we record this, at 5:32 in the afternoon Central European time, actually I don't know, I didn't check in the last hour, however I did check earlier on today, it's still down. Now don't get me wrong, you can use the software. If you're a person who prepares their music on the software to DJ on standalone gear and stuff, it works. If you've bought the software, your subscription carries on. And the company, I think, have kind of said that they're not going to charge you if you want to cancel it, although they have been a bit opaque about that, which would be a PR disaster, I would say. But anyway, but the problem exists that you can't, you know, as I mentioned, you bought some gear and you want some features that you haven't got. You can, you know, at the moment, you can just sit and wait because it ain't going to happen. And so this is a big problem for a big company, right? Now, the issue has happened because their software uses a third party to implement the subscription. It is a big company from years ago called Digital River. Now, Digital River was one of those companies like IBM or something that was a monster in its day, but it's been completely left behind by more fleet of foot payment providers and so on. And Digital River was having problems. It's been having problems for a long, long time, but it finally went down. And that is what caused the problem. Their payment provider literally was shuttered without notice. And so they're stuck with a payment provider that isn't providing the subscriptions and payment services that they need. Now, you could say, well, surely they should have thought about this earlier, or surely they should have had a contingency in place. And you know what? You'd probably be right. And this brings me on to the thing I really want to talk about today, which is the state of DJ software. Because here's the problem. A lot of today's DJ software, despite some of its amazing features, despite the fact that it works with incredible DJ gear and so on, is frankly held together with sticky tape. It's a bit of this and a bit of that. It is not well managed and it is not best in class. And there's reasons for this. My personal opinion is that DJing is just too small a sector for the very best minds and the best subscriptions and the best services and the best of class to just exist there. You know, if you've used photography software or video editing software or music production software and so on, these apps are slick, these apps are good, but the number of people using them is so much higher than the number of people using DJ software, right? So I just feel that it's intrinsic, it's kind of built into our industry and it's built into our world that our software just isn't whisper it very good. Now there are exceptions, but unfortunately the exceptions tend to come from companies that don't have very good or even any hardware of their own. So you get this situation where you get companies that make great hardware whose software isn't very good, or you get companies that make great software whose hardware is non-existent, or it has to be someone else's hardware and then the implementation isn't very good and so on. There is no real perfection. There's no one company that's got this right yet, and probably never will be. But it leaves us talking about what should a DJ do? Well, in the case of Rekordbox, I am sure that they will fix this. They need to fix a few things, frankly. They need to fix their communication with their users, and I'm sure they will, because they have no choice. And, you know, I remember a day when Rekordbox wasn't even written by that company. It was just a rebadged version of someone else's software. So they have moved on a lot in recent years, but they've got a lot further to go. And in their case, I think it's a case of putting some money into it, frankly, and also increasing the quality of their communication with their users, which has always been pretty biblically bad. So I think they'll fix it. I think it's an acute problem, albeit one that's been going on for a long time now. Indeed, in the comments, ATGR says it actually started happening at the end of December. So, you know, it's a long time. We're talking 2 months now that this has been happening to some extent. But you know, I think the biggest issue here, and this is something that I've seen on social media and also talking to our students, is the expectation. Because people expect when they buy state-of-the-art DJ equipment, hardware and so on, that the software will be just as good. And it just isn't, sadly. And I don't think it ever will be. And that is the thing that has got people quite surprised who have maybe come to DJing from other sectors, as I say, like photography or music production, where you just don't expect these things to happen in those places. But unfortunately, they do happen in DJ software. Another example, it's not quite so serious, but whenever Apple issues a new version of its operating system, an upgrade from that last year's version to this year's version, you always get the emails coming out saying, do not upgrade, whatever you do, we haven't had time to test it yet. This is something that ideally shouldn't happen. It does happen because the resources aren't there to get it right immediately. And in the case of Rekordbox, I think it's an extreme example, and I think they could have handled it a lot better by fending it off when it was obvious it was going to happen, and then by communicating a lot better with their subscribers. But hey, that's down to them. But DJ software as a sector is not brilliant. It's at best slow moving, at worst stuck together with sticky tape. And even when you do get good software, it tends to be from companies which don't really have the hardware support to give an all-round solution. Just how it is, unfortunately. Stephen says, that's software for you. You wouldn't get problems like this with hardware like vinyl or CDs or downloading music. No, Stephen, but you wouldn't get all the fun of software then either, right? All the amazing things that software can do that those systems can't do. Frank says, if a company pushes its users to high-tech stuff and charges for it, it should ensure they've spent a lot of money on the best software engineers. I kind of get that. And I think it's the subscription thing that gets people's backs up as well. There's a feeling that if you're subscribing for something, it should be good, right? And I get that. And Sarah says, I get that software is a niche when it comes to DJ software, and it will never be as slick as most other software. But the failure to fix the breakdown of subscriptions and payment of software for the biggest DJ gear label in the world is truly epic. It's an epic fail, you're saying there, Sarah. And it's hard to argue against that as well. And that's where we're going to leave it for today. Thank you so much for being with us. I hope you found something useful in this podcast. Leave us a nice rating or review if you did. Now, if you'd like to have a question on one of our podcasts, our next podcast is indeed a student podcast where our students ask all the questions. Then come to digitaldjtips.com, take a look at our DJ courses, pick one that you like the look of and jump on board. You'll then be told all about the places where you can join the live recordings of these and indeed ask questions along the way. Meanwhile though, from me, Phil Morse, here in the Digital DJ Tips studio, all that's left for me to say is get good, get out there, make the moments, and I'll see you again for another podcast very soon. Bye-bye for now.